It's a hard story to hear. Even hearing the word slave, and that a young girl was told to go back and submit. I have a hard time. At the same time, I love Hagar and the lessons that she has for us today are important. As I said, this is the last Sunday in February in the official Black History Month, although we need to continue to learn from one another. And it's been interesting to consider the stories of people that we think of as people of color, when in reality we would have been the people of color in this time as people with white skin. We turn to this difficult story, and it's important for us to consider the context and the time in which it was set. So a couple of things. The idea that a woman could be a surrogate, which is the language we use now, it's not unique to our time in history. In writings that date back to around 1900 BCE, before the Common Era, a marriage contract stipulated that if the wife did not give birth in 2 years, because that's what gave them meaning, was supplying offspring to their husband, and they had 2 whole years to get that done. If a wife didn't give birth in 2 years, she could purchase a slave woman for the husband. In most cases where these laws and understandings were in place, the plan was that this slave woman would be brought in as the surrogate. The story of Hagar and Sarai dates to somewhere between 1930 and 1840 BCE, so right in that time period. At the same time, the Code of Hammurabi, which was kind of what everything was based on at the time, acknowledged the possibility that the slave woman, once pregnant, might claim equality with her mistress. The code also allowed for the mistress to treat the woman as an ordinary slave, setting up perfectly the scene that we have today for this story. And so while Abram and Sarai have been said to be older as well, we don't know the age of Hagar, but we can assume she is young enough to be considered a likely candidate for pregnancy. So this older couple have this younger woman who is expected to do as they please. We're told that Hagar runs away to escape the harsh treatment that Sarai is doling out and Abram is allowing to happen. A story that, again, is all too familiar in this nation. And when we think about the names that we know, like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and the other perhaps up to or more than 50,000 who escaped slavery via the Underground Railroad, we realize that the story is not just ancient, that it's too close to our own history. So once Hagar runs away, this is where the story takes a turn. She is met by a messenger that she later recognizes as God, a God she didn't know or worship, but she recognized it as God. And after this conversation, she's instructed to return to Sarai. And I struggle. I said earlier we struggle, but I assume we would all struggle with that directive. Why is she being told to return to a place where she's not wanted, where she suffers abuse, where she's only good enough to offer up her womb for a loan? But think about what that conversation includes. She's told that she's going to give birth to a son who will be the father of a multitude, more than can be counted. And while her story isn't told in the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad does talk about her and talks about her name, which means splendid or nourishing. There's another meaning of a name. She will be the splendid mother who will nourish a people. So in this conversation, She hears two questions. Where have you come from is the first. Where does Hagar come from? We don't know. All we know is the story at this moment, that she came from a place of slavery, although we don't know that that's what she had before. We know she came from a place where she was not acknowledged as anything other than a means to an end. She came from a place where they may not have even known her name, because when Sarai and Abram are having that discussion, they're saying, "You're slave girl." No, you're slave girl, not Hagar. She's coming from a place where the people who made decisions about her life don't even call her by name. And we know that God knows her name, because the messenger, who is God, calls her by name, calls her Hagar. And so even if the people who were making decisions about her did not know her name, God did. God called her in the wilderness. And that's when things begin to change. That she's been able to conceive changes the dynamic. She should receive some recognition when she goes back. We're told that she kind of looks down on Sarai because now they are more equals, even though she is not treated that way. That's where she's been. But then God says, "Where are you going?" You need to go back. You need to go back to where you came from. Imagine how that feels and sounds to Hagar. Go back. Why should I go back? It feels harsh. It feels unnecessary to go back to a place where she's unseen, to a place where her only purpose in life is to serve as an incubator. She didn't have any reason to believe or think it would be different in any way. But what we know, again, with the 2020 hindsight, is that returning ensured her life. She had run into the wilderness without food or water, without any means of support or protection. To stay in the wilderness would almost certainly bring on suffering or death. And to return would bring about the possibility of life for her and her child. It was that impossible decision, but the angel that she recognized as God was telling her to go back. Now, returning sounds like a punishment, but she is returning changed with more power than she realized. And when she does return, it's barely even noted in the narrative that she was back. We're told that she gives birth to a son that she names Ishmael, as she's been instructed, which literally means God will hear. Because she has discovered for herself that God indeed heard her fears, her cries, her tears, and responded. And Ishmael is a daily reminder that God hears. So why does this story matter? I am getting to a place that I want us to be. Story matters for many reasons, but I want to bring up two in particular. Number one, Hagar is the first woman in the Bible who hears an annunciation, an announcement of what is about to happen in her life. The messenger, who is God's self, comes to her with a pronouncement about the child she will bear. Now, we call that story familiar because we tell it every year on Christmas Eve. We tell the story of Mary's relative, Elizabeth, right before Christmas Eve. We tell the story about Sarah in just a few chapters in the book of Genesis. We tell it about a woman named Hannah who gave birth to Samuel. Women who receive a visitation, if you will, and have an announcement that they are going to bear a child, a significant child. Hagar's the first. It's the first announcement to a woman in the Bible. Hagar is also the only person in the Bible, not just what we call the Old Testament, not the Hebrew Bible. Hagar is the only person, male or female or anyone, who gives name to God based on her experience. Now, in years to come, In a few more chapters, Moses is going to encounter a burning bush, and rather than saying, "This is the God of the burning bush," Moses says, "What's your name?" And the voice of God says, "I am who I am. I will be who I will be." Very ethereal. Moses did not name God. In time, Jacob will be wrestling with an angel, and he will name the place where it happened, but he will not name God. Long before any of that, Hagar acknowledges that she has seen God and lived. So she names God El Roi, which literally means the God of seeing. Now, it took me a long time to get there. But the God of seeing is who we call upon today. The stories all around us of modern day Hagars who are living in a wilderness, who call upon the God who sees. We know their names from the news, and I would venture to say that George Floyd knew the God who saw him. Trayvon Martin, who would have turned 28 this week, would have called upon El Roi, the God who sees me. Breonna Taylor knew the God who sees. It's been a really hard week. And I want to lift up 3 stories that have been before us that tell us the God who sees is still very much with us. And I'm going to light candles for these 3 people. And we could cover this altar with stories and candles. But for these 3 that have spoken, the God who sees saw Sam Nordquist, a transgender man from Minnesota, who died when the people who purportedly loved him proved they didn't. His mother, his sister, his friends love him and miss him. And the God who is El Roi, the God who sees, saw the brokenness. God sees Sam and all who endure depraved indifference. Help us, God, to see Sam and all of our transgender siblings who are living in fear, who worry about their health care, who are with us, who we see. In our very own community, Christy or Chrissy Gallagher McMillan, a woman who lived in Omaha, who fought for the rights of the homeless, who spoke truth to elected officials and to the church, who continued to care for her beloved Chewy, her beautiful dog. And although she was offered help, she chose to stay close to her people. And in the cold temperatures last week, she succumbed to hypothermia in the tent where she was living. People who knew her said she had the biggest heart, often offering her own tent to someone who didn't have shelter. Her son, her mother, her brother, and her friends love her and miss her. The God who is El Roi, the God who sees, help us to see the need that is all around us. We trust and know that God sees Chrissy and all who experience coldness in the world by temperatures or by lack of care. And help us offer hope and warmth to all. "11-year-old Jocelyn Rojo Carranza in Gainesville, Texas. Classmates at school threatening to call ICE on her family, threatening that she would be alone in the world. Out of fear or exhaustion, she took her life. She was 11. At her funeral on Wednesday, a deacon at her church said she didn't know how to understand the things that happen in the world. I don't understand that. Do any of us? Can any of us understand that level of not seeing one another as children of God? Do we ever want to be in a place where we do understand that? I hope not. Her mother, her family, her friends love her, and they miss her. And the God who is Elroy, the God who sees, help us see the youngest among us, their prayers, their fears, their needs. God saw and sees Jocelyn and all those who experience bullying. And help us to stand in defense and solidarity. Where have you been? Where did you come from? That's where we came from this week. That's what we brought with us into this moment today. That's what we've seen. And after first service, I had people telling me that that's happening in Omaha, that kids have been suspended for threatening kids with ICE. We're going to call ICE on you. This is not who we are, church. This can't be who we are or what we allow to happen. Hagar demands it. Hagar demands that we know the God who sees and that we see with the divine eyesight in the world and see what is happening and use our voices to speak up, to confront, to challenge, to say this is not who we are. Where have we come from? A really hard week. Where are we going? We're going into the world with our eyes wide open in the spirit of the God who sees. To see the need that is all around us. To see the least, the lost, the lonely. And to tell them they're not alone. To tell them the God who sees them and we see them. That's where we're going, church. That's where we're going. Would you pray with me? God, 3 stories that impacted us, that challenge us, that remind us of the need for the church to be the hands, the feet, the eyes, the ears of Christ in the world. God who sees, see us, prepare us. Give us the strength to be your people in the world. You need us. We will go from this moment to be your people. Amen.
No matter what people say or think about me, I am a child, I am a child